Before the arrival of British ships and colonial flags, Australia held one of the oldest continuous cultures on Earth, one that stretches back tens of thousands of years. This ancient continent was home to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, whose traditions, languages, and connections to land evolved over millennia. While much popular history begins at the moment Captain Cook landed in 1770, the real story of Australia began far earlier, in a world shaped by survival, adaptation, spirituality, and deep relationships with land and sea. Imagine a landscape alive with stories older than the pyramids, where sacred songlines guide travelers, where fire was used as a tool of renewal, and where every rock, river, and tree held memory. This is a story not just of geography, but of human endurance, creativity, and a worldview that modern history has often overlooked. Today, we'll go beyond stereotypes and colonial narratives to explore the forgotten ancient world of Australia, a place of wisdom, complexity, and continuity that predates most recorded histories. Your understanding of Australia will never be the same after seeing its first people in their true historical context. When we talk about ancient civilizations, we often think of Egypt or Mesopotamia, but what many don't realize is that Aboriginal Australia represents the oldest continuous culture on the planet, with estimates suggesting human presence at least 65,000 years ago. That's nearly 3 times older than the Great Pyramids of Giza, and far older than the earliest Greek civilizations. These early Australians survived massive climate changes, shifting coastlines, megafauna extinctions, and rising seas. Through it all, they maintained traditions, languages, and social systems that were passed down across thousands of generations. Communities across the continent lived in deep balance with their environment, knowing seasonal cycles, hunting practices and water sources in ways that modern science is only beginning to appreciate. Archaeological sites like Mashdebee in the Northern Territory have offered remarkable evidence of ancient habitation, fire-cracked stones, tools, and remnants of ancient hearths, all pointing to early human ingenuity. This ancient legacy isn't lost. It's present today in the living cultures of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. They are the living descendants of one of humanity's most remarkable chapters, a story of depth, connection, and survival that outlived centuries and continents. Central to understanding ancient Australia is the concept of Dreamtime, a worldview that goes beyond myth or folklore and into the heart of Aboriginal identity. Dreamtime stories are not distant fairy tales. They are living narratives that explain how the world was formed, how people came to be, and how everything in nature is connected. Every river, mountain, and animal has a dreaming, a creation story that ties land and spirit together. These tales were passed down through song, dance, art, and ceremony, long before written language existed on the continent. Dreamtime isn't merely historical. It permeates daily life, law, and relationships within communities. It's a knowledge system, a moral guide, and a connection to ancestors. For ancient Australians, stories weren't imaginary. They were truthful accounts anchored in the landscape itself. Songlines, often called tracks of creation, map the journeys of ancestral beings and are used to navigate across vast territories. These songlines are essentially living maps, oral histories, and spiritual pathways all in one. To view Australia's ancient history without appreciating Dreamtime is to miss the very lens through which its first people saw their world. Long before the British arrived, Australia wasn't a single culture or language. It was a mosaic of hundreds of distinct nations, each with its own languages, laws, territories, and traditions. Estimates suggest that at the time of first contact there were up to 250 separate language groups, some with multiple dialects spread across deserts, forests, rivers, and coastlines. From the Yolgu people in the north to the Wiradjuri in the southeast, these nations developed intricate social systems suited to their environment. There was sophisticated knowledge of astronomy, medicine, art, and water management, all finely tuned to local ecosystems. Trade networks crossed the continent, connecting nations through commerce, marriage, and ceremony. Items like stone tools, ochre, and shells traveled vast distances, showing ancient economic systems that worked long before European trade routes existed. This diversity was not chaotic. It was harmonious and deeply structured. It defies the stereotype of early indigenous peoples as homogeneous or primitive. Instead, Australia was home to a rich, interconnected web of cultures, each contributing to a huge tapestry of human experience. To appreciate Australia's ancient world, we must recognize this diversity as foundational, not peripheral. In ancient Australia, the landscape wasn't a backdrop. It was a teacher, a provider, and a living being. The environment shaped the way people lived, traveled, and thought about the world. From the tropical coasts of Arnhem Land to the arid deserts of Central Australia, each region demanded different survival skills and cultural adaptations. Waterholes were sacred, trees were ancestors, and stone formations were reminders of creation ancestors walking the land. People understood ecological balance with astonishing precision, using fire in deliberate patterns to encourage new growth, prevent large wildfires, and cultivate hunting grounds. This practice, now called fire stick farming, shows deep environmental knowledge that predates modern ecology by millennia. Ancient Australians were not passive observers of nature. They actively worked with it, creating landscapes that were productive and sustainable. Their knowledge wasn't written in books. It was etched into the land and encoded in tradition. Seasonal calendars, food knowledge, weather prediction, and animal behavior were all part of lived wisdom. To understand Australia before the British is to see a world where people were not separate from nature, but deeply part of it. Their survival wasn't luck. It was learned through keen observation and cultural continuity. Australia's ancient peoples left behind some of the most profound artistic expressions in human history. Rock art, painted or carved into stone shelters and cliffs across the continent, is not decoration, but storytelling. Sites like Kakadu, Arnhem Land, the Kimberley, and Mariga, Burrup Peninsula, contain paintings that may be tens of thousands of years old, longer than many known cave arts in Europe. Images of ancestral beings, hunting scenes, celestial connections, and ceremonial life are rendered with striking skill. These artworks aren't static relics. They are part of living tradition and spiritual connection. Some paintings depict X-ray styles showing internal anatomy, indicating scientific observation as well as symbolic meaning. Others map songlines, encoding physical and spiritual paths across the land. In ancient Australia, art and life were inseparable. The rock surfaces were memory banks telling stories of creation, law, and identity. These artistic expressions weren't created by solitary figures. They were communal, collaborative, and taught across generations. Through art, history was not written, it was lived, rehearsed, and performed. To gaze at these paintings today is to peer into a worldview that stretches further back in time than most human civilizations. Long before European contact, ancient Australians were part of vast trade and exchange networks that spanned the continent. These weren't small barter systems, but intricate economic relationships that connected communities across hundreds and sometimes thousands of kilometers. Stone tools from Central Australia have been found on the coast, while shells from the sea traveled deep inland. Ochre, a pigment used in art and ceremony, was exchanged as far away as the desert regions. These patterns show that ancient Australians were cosmopolitan in their own right, traders, negotiators, and travelers. Trade wasn't only about goods, it was about relationships, knowledge sharing, marriage alliances, and spiritual exchange. Trade routes followed songlines and watercourses, blending economic and cultural travel. People brought news, stories, and innovations from group to group, creating a web of interdependence that sustained diverse regions. These networks challenge misconceptions of early indigenous Australians as isolated or unsophisticated. Instead, they reveal complex and organized social systems where exchange was foundational. The ancient world of Australia was not fragmented. It was connected, dynamic, and deeply social. Trade echoes across time not as an exception, but as a rule in pre-colonial Australia. Australia's ancient peoples witnessed dramatic environmental changes long before British arrival. During the last ice age, sea levels were much lower, creating land bridges between Australia and New Guinea, a landmass known as Sahul. People walked across these now submerged plains, spreading culture, language, and genetic diversity. As the Ice Age ended and seas rose around 10,000 years ago, these land bridges disappeared, creating the island continent we know today. Rivers shifted, coastlines changed, and new ecosystems emerged. These changes didn't erase culture, they transformed it. Communities adapted, moved, and re-established their relationships to land and sea. Stories of rising waters, shifting landscapes, and ancestral journeys are captured in Dreamtime narratives, testimony to ancient memory persisting across generations. Even today, indigenous knowledge includes an understanding of ancient sea level changes and ecosystem shifts that aligns with modern science. Australia's ancient peoples weren't static. They lived through deep geological cycles and environmental upheaval. Their survival wasn't accidental, it was adaptive. These environmental transitions shaped not just physical geography, but cultural memory, belief systems, and social organization. The real story of Australia is not a frozen snapshot. It's a living archive of human resilience. Ancient Australians practiced a form of environmental stewardship that modern ecologists only began to recognize in the last century. Known today as fire stick farming, this method involved deliberate, controlled use of fire to manage vegetation. Far from destructive, these burns encouraged the growth of new plants, prevented large wildfires, and created diverse habitats for game animals. Fire was a tool, a teacher, and a covenant with land. Different regions had different fire seasons, techniques, and purposes, all developed through careful observation and tradition. These practices shaped ecosystems in ways that benefited both people and biodiversity. Wetlands, grasslands, and forests all responded to cycles of fire, promoting nutrient renewal and ecological balance. This knowledge wasn't written in manuals. It was encoded in custom, ceremony, and responsibility. Elders passed down rules about when, where, and how fires should be used. The goal wasn't dominance over nature, but harmony with it. These land management practices weren't primitive. They were sophisticated, long-tested, and bent on sustaining environments over millennia. To view ancient Australia without acknowledging fire stick farming is to miss a central pillar of how its people lived in continuous balance with their world. Ancient Australians were keen observers of the sky, and their knowledge of astronomy was deeply woven into culture, ceremony, and navigation. The stars weren't distant objects. They were ancestors, maps, and teachers. Constellations like the emu in the sky, formed not by stars but by the dark spaces between them, guided seasonal calendars, told Dreamtime stories, and signaled ecological changes. When certain star clusters rose at specific times, they warned of animal migrations, plant cycles, or weather shifts. This wasn't superstition. It was empirical observation passed down across generations. Such celestial knowledge helped people track time, understand direction, and order ceremonies. Ancient Australians didn't use clocks, but they had sophisticated timekeeping woven into cultural rhythms. The sky and the land were mirrors, each reflecting cycles of life. Astronomy was part of daily existence, not detached science. These observations were shared through song, dance, art, and oral history. Studying the sky wasn't separate from living well. It was essential to survival and identity. The ancient world of Australia was not isolated from the cosmos. It was intimately connected to it in ways that parallel the most ancient human astronomical traditions on Earth. One of the most extraordinary features of ancient Australian culture is the songline, a concept that merges navigation, history, spirituality, and storytelling. A songline is more than a route. It's a sacred pathway that follows the journeys of ancestral beings across the land during the Dreamtime. Each verse of a song describes a specific geographic feature: a river bend, a rock outcrop, a watering hole, and by singing the song in order, travelers could navigate vast distances without maps. These oral maps were incredibly accurate, passed down through generations with precision. Different language groups would share parts of songlines, with each group responsible for maintaining a section through performance, ceremony, and care of the land. Following a songline was not just practical, it was ceremonial. It reaffirmed kinship, territory, and spiritual law. To disrespect or forget a songline was to sever ties with the ancestors and landscape itself. In the ancient world of Australia, memory and geography were inseparable. Songlines are living libraries as rich as any archive, and they show how knowledge, land, and identity were bound together in a uniquely indigenous way. For ancient Australians, the land was more than terrain. It was sacred. Specific locations across the continent were sites of deep spiritual and ancestral significance. These sacred sites marked where Dreamtime ancestors created life, fought battles, or formed the rivers, hills, and stars. These places weren't only symbolic, they were living connections to the spiritual realm, where ceremonies were performed, laws were remembered, and responsibilities to country were renewed. Sites like Eluo, Katajuta, and Burrup Peninsula hold sacred meaning that predates recorded history. Each community had its own sacred geography, passed down through complex oral traditions. Access to these sites was often restricted. Only certain people, at specific times and stages of initiation, could approach them. They were not tourist destinations, but living parts of culture and law. Protection of sacred sites was a matter of survival, spiritual, social, and environmental. These places are not just relics of the past. They remain central to identity today. Understanding Australia's ancient world requires acknowledging that spirituality was embedded in geography, and geography was imbued with memory, story, and ancestral presence. Contrary to the myth that Aboriginal Australians were purely nomadic hunter-gatherers, evidence shows they practiced sophisticated forms of agriculture and aquaculture. In parts of Victoria, for example, the Gunditjmara people built intricate stone channels, weirs, and ponds to trap and farm eel populations, a sustainable practice that lasted thousands of years. These systems required knowledge of hydrology, animal behavior, and seasonal cycles. In other regions, seeds were harvested, ground into flour, and baked into bread, making ancient Australians among the earliest bread makers in the world. People actively planted and maintained native crops like yam daisies, managing soil and regrowth cycles. They returned to known food sites annually, ensuring regrowth through techniques akin to crop rotation. These food practices challenge outdated views that labeled Aboriginal Australians as passive in their environment. In truth, they were managers of the land, engineers, farmers, and stewards. Their deep knowledge of edible plants, roots, fruits, and animals created sustainable systems of nourishment. Australia before colonization was not untouched wilderness. It was a carefully tended and understood landscape shaped by human ingenuity. Ancient Australian societies operated under complex kinship systems that governed every aspect of life, from marriage and trade to ceremony and conflict resolution. These systems weren't informal. They were codified, consistent, and deeply understood. Every person belonged to a skin group or clan that determined their relationships with others, who they could marry, how they should behave, and what responsibilities they held. These kinship rules created strong social cohesion and minimized conflict. Elders held authority, not through dominance, but through wisdom, storytelling, and spiritual knowledge. Decisions were made collectively, and disputes were resolved through negotiation and ceremonial law. Initiation rites, often lasting years, prepared young people for adulthood, teaching them the laws, stories, and responsibilities of their people. Gender roles were respected, but often complementary rather than hierarchical. Knowledge was shared through performance, repetition, and mentorship, not through writing, but through lived experience. These social systems enabled thousands of generations to thrive in challenging environments. Far from primitive, they were highly functional and deeply ethical. Ancient Australian communities had a clear sense of identity, belonging, and social responsibility, key pillars of their long-term survival. Before British colonization, ancient Australians weren't entirely isolated. In northern Australia, particularly Arnhem Land, Aboriginal communities had long-standing contact with Macassan traders from what is now Indonesia. For hundreds of years, possibly dating back to the 1600s, Macassan sailed to northern shores to harvest trepang, sea cucumber, a delicacy in Chinese markets. In exchange, they traded goods like metal tools, rice, and cloth with local Aboriginal groups. These interactions were largely peaceful and mutually beneficial. Aboriginal people adapted Macassan words into their language, incorporated new materials, and even intermarried in some cases. This contact shows that ancient Australians were part of broader regional networks, aware of and engaged with foreign visitors well before European colonists arrived. Cultural exchange wasn't limited to goods. It extended to art, language, and navigation. The Macassan connection is a powerful reminder that the ancient world of Australia was not static or sealed off. It was dynamic, adaptive, and globally aware. These interactions enriched local cultures and expanded indigenous worldviews, challenging any notion that pre-British Australia existed in isolation. In ancient Australia, laws weren't written down. They were performed, remembered, and lived. Aboriginal legal systems, often called law, governed relationships, land use, marriage, inheritance, and conflict resolution. These laws were spiritual as much as social, rooted in Dreamtime stories, and enforced through ceremony, oral tradition, and elder authority. Offenses such as trespassing, theft, or violating kinship rules were dealt with through structured processes that involved community discussion, ritual punishment, or compensation. The purpose of justice was restoration, not vengeance. In many cases, payback was administered as a public ceremony designed to restore balance, rather than as imprisonment or exclusion. Elders were not judges in the modern sense, but knowledge holders who guided their people with deep understanding of ancestral law. Children learned law through initiation, dance, storytelling, and observation, absorbing rules through repetition and participation. These legal systems were highly localized and adapted to the needs of each environment. While different in form from British law, they were not lawless. Aboriginal societies had consistent ethical codes of conduct that maintained order for tens of thousands of years. In Aboriginal Australia, the idea of land ownership as defined by Western colonization doesn't apply. Instead, there exists a powerful concept called connection to country. Country isn't just land, it's a living entity that includes people, animals, plants, water, and spirit. Individuals don't own the land owns them. Each person has a duty of care to specific tracts of land based on kinship, birthright, and ancestral connection. These duties include protecting sacred sites, performing ceremonies, maintaining songlines, and teaching the stories of the land to future generations. The bond is emotional, spiritual, and legal, not transactional. Displacement from country is not simply relocation. It's a severing of identity. For ancient Australians, being on your country is essential to health, spirit, and community. Every mountain, river, and tree carries meaning. This perspective shaped how land was used, how conflicts were avoided, and how sustainability was achieved. It's a concept that continues today, especially in the fight for land rights and recognition. In pre-British Australia, land wasn't property. It was a sacred relationship that defined every aspect of life. Aboriginal Australians developed rich medical systems based on observation, trial, and spiritual understanding of the natural world. Healers, often known as Ngangkari in Central Australia or similar terms elsewhere, held deep knowledge of bush medicine, anatomy, and emotional well-being. They used native plants for antiseptics, pain relief, wound treatment, and digestive issues. Gum from eucalyptus trees, wattle seed, and tea tree leaves were among the many natural remedies used effectively for thousands of years. Healing wasn't limited to the physical. It included spiritual and emotional restoration, often involving ceremony, song, and energy work. Illness was sometimes seen as an imbalance between the individual and their environment or spirit world. Healing involved reconnecting to country, law, and ancestors. These practices were passed down orally, often through gendered knowledge systems, with specific healing techniques taught only to men or women, depending on tradition. Today, many of these healing practices are being revived and respected alongside Western medicine. They reveal a sophisticated understanding of health that was holistic, sustainable, and embedded in ancient cultural wisdom. Aboriginal Australians crafted a variety of sophisticated tools and weapons, perfectly suited to the environments they lived in. The most iconic is the boomerang, not just a returning toy, but a hunting and fighting tool designed for aerodynamic precision. Some boomerangs were non-returning, built for maximum impact in battle or for knocking down animals. Stone axes, spears, clubs, and digging sticks were used with skill, and were often made with great care and ceremonial value. Tools were made from stone, wood, shell, and bone, all shaped using grinding, flaking, and fire. Craftsmanship was passed down over generations, with improvements adapted to local terrain. In desert regions, tools were lightweight and portable. In wetter areas, heavier tools and even canoes were used. Innovation was constant, shaped by necessity and environment. These tools weren't crude. They were refined, purposeful, and respected. Every tool had a story, and every weapon was connected to a law, a ceremony, or a purpose. In ancient Australia, technology wasn't about machines. It was about harmony with materials, tradition, and knowledge. Life in ancient Australia was structured by seasonal cycles, community roles, and shared responsibility. Daily routines weren't clock-driven, but based on natural indicators, the movement of stars, the blooming of certain plants, or animal migrations. Camps were established near water sources, shifting with the seasons. Tasks were divided by age, gender, and ability, not rigidly, but cooperatively. Children learned through play, observation, and imitation. They were not passive learners. They participated in gathering, storytelling, and rituals from a young age. Elders were central to the community as educators, advisors, and cultural custodians. Ceremonies marked every major stage of life: birth, initiation, marriage, and death, and reinforced social bonds. Humor, art, and storytelling were constant companions to work and travel. Dance and song were not hobbies. They were lifelines for memory, culture, and law. The daily life of ancient Australians was not one of constant struggle, but of balance between people, land, and spirit. It was a life deeply grounded in community, rhythm, and shared wisdom, a way of living the modern world is only beginning to appreciate. Ceremony was the heartbeat of ancient Australian society. Far from being occasional rituals, ceremonies were woven into the rhythms of daily life, used to transmit law, celebrate life transitions, and maintain balance between people, spirits, and land. These events could last for hours or even days, involving song, dance, body painting, costume, and storytelling. They weren't entertainment. They were spiritual and legal acts where ancestors were invoked and responsibilities reaffirmed. Men and women often had separate ceremonial roles with different knowledge systems passed through gendered lines. Initiation ceremonies marked a young person's passage into adulthood, while mourning rituals ensured the safe passage of spirits into the next world. Through these performances, language, lore, and land rights were preserved. Each movement, beat, or chant carried encoded knowledge. Ceremonies were also diplomatic, used to settle disputes, forge alliances, or welcome outsiders. In ancient Australia, memory wasn't archived in books. It lived through performance. These cultural expressions created unity across generations, linking the present to the dreaming. Even today, many Aboriginal communities continue these traditions, keeping an ancient world alive in modern time. Women held critical roles in ancient Australian societies, often as custodians of specific knowledge, medicines, and ceremonies. While men and women had distinct responsibilities, neither was subordinate. Women were gatherers of food, but also educators, healers, and spiritual leaders in their own right. In many nations, women maintained exclusive knowledge systems, including sacred songs, birthing practices, and female-specific Dreamtime stories. Some ceremonies were gender-restricted, with only initiated women allowed to participate. Elders among women were respected for their wisdom, often guiding the moral and cultural direction of the community. They taught children, led family groups, and passed on plant-based medicine. Artistic expression, such as weaving and painting, was another domain where women's voices thrived. These contributions challenged colonial-era portrayals that reduced women's roles to background figures. In truth, women were vital to cultural continuity, health, and spiritual balance. Their knowledge was different from men's, but equally complex. Understanding the ancient world of Australia means recognizing the dual pillars of cultural authority, where both men and women held power, responsibility, and sacred connection to land and lore. Ancient Australians didn't follow a 4-season calendar like in Europe. Instead, many indigenous groups observed detailed seasonal calendars with 5 to 7 distinct seasons based on local environmental changes. These seasons weren't just about temperature. They marked shifts in animal behavior, plant life cycles, and celestial events. For example, the blooming of a certain flower might signal the arrival of fish spawning season or the migration of a key food species. This ecological intelligence was localized and passed down orally, often through song and story. It enabled communities to move, hunt, and gather with precision, maximizing resources while minimizing ecological disruption. These calendars weren't just tools for survival. They reflected a deep spiritual and observational relationship with the natural world. In places like Arnhem Land and the Kimberley, modern scientists have studied these indigenous calendars to improve fire management, biodiversity conservation, and climate research. Ancient Australians didn't guess the seasons, they read them in nature's patterns. This adaptive knowledge helped people thrive across thousands of landscapes for tens of thousands of years. In the absence of written language, ancient Australians developed one of the most advanced oral traditions in the world. Education was immersive, participatory, and continuous. Children didn't sit in classrooms. They learned through story, song, observation, and imitation. Every aspect of life, from how to hunt, cook, and gather to understanding kinship, law, and spirituality, was taught through layers of story and ceremony. The same tale might be told in multiple versions, one for children, another for adults, and a deeper version for elders. This system allowed knowledge to evolve with the learner, becoming more profound over time. Song was a key teaching tool, combining melody, rhythm, and repetition to ensure knowledge would be remembered across generations. Art, dance, and even tools were used as mnemonic devices. These methods weren't informal. They were structured, intentional, and incredibly effective. Ancient Australians developed multi-sensory learning systems that encoded vast amounts of information without writing. Their schools were the stars, the land, and the people themselves, living classrooms under open skies. One of the most underappreciated aspects of ancient Australian life was how successfully indigenous peoples adapted to climate change. Over tens of thousands of years, Australia's environment underwent drastic shifts, from lush Ice Age savannas to arid deserts, rising sea levels, and prolonged droughts. Aboriginal communities didn't just survive these changes, they adapted their technologies, stories, and social structures to new realities. Coastal groups moved inland as shorelines rose. Desert communities learned to store and manage water in extreme heat. Animals once hunted became extinct, leading to shifts in diet and hunting methods. Oral histories preserve memories of ancient floods and coastline changes, aligning with geological and archaeological data. These environmental shifts weren't seen as anomalies. They were part of the long dance between people and land. This deep-time resilience is more relevant than ever as modern societies face their own climate crises. Ancient Australians offer not only a record of survival, but a blueprint for adaptability, blending observation, tradition, and flexibility over unimaginably long timescales. When British colonizers first encountered Aboriginal Australians, they saw what they wanted to see: a people without agriculture, writing, or buildings. Early settlers declared the land terra nullius, meaning land belonging to no one, erasing thousands of years of human presence in a single legal fiction. This was not a mistake of ignorance, but a deliberate myth used to justify colonization. British colonists failed to recognize complex systems of law, trade, land management, and knowledge because they didn't resemble European norms. This misunderstanding shaped generations of policy, education, and historical narrative, turning one of the world's oldest continuous civilizations into an afterthought in its own land. The consequences of that erasure are still being confronted today. But as archaeological and cultural research expands, these myths are being dismantled. The truth is, ancient Australia was never empty, never primitive. It was sophisticated, adaptive, and deeply human. Rediscovering this truth doesn't just correct a historical record, it reclaims the dignity and depth of cultures nearly erased by colonization. The arrival of the British in 1788 marked the beginning of catastrophic disruption for Aboriginal Australians. Disease, displacement, violence, and cultural suppression devastated populations and ways of life that had endured for tens of thousands of years. Sacred sites were destroyed, children were stolen, languages were banned or lost. The colonial worldview viewed indigenous people as obstacles to be removed or assimilated. Ancient systems of land care, education, and governance were systematically dismantled. Yet, through this darkness, Aboriginal people resisted, adapted, and survived. Oral traditions continued in secret. Ceremonies were held out of sight. Kinship ties and country remained spiritual lifelines, even in missions, prisons, and settlements. Colonization didn't erase ancient Australia, it wounded it. But the strength of those ancient traditions allowed survival. Today's cultural renaissance among Indigenous Australians through language revival, art, land rights movements, and education is a testament to this resilience. Australia before the British didn't vanish. It endured, and it continues to teach, inspire, and demand recognition. Despite centuries of disruption, ancient Australian culture has not been lost. It lives on. Across the continent, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities continue to practice language, ceremony, art, and knowledge systems that date back tens of thousands of years. In Arnhem Land, elders still sing sacred songlines. In the deserts, bush foods and fire management are taught to new generations. In cities, Indigenous artists fuse ancient traditions with modern expression. These aren't reconstructions. They are continuations of the oldest cultural thread on Earth. Every language revived, every sacred site reclaimed, and every child taught about their ancestors is a victory of continuity. Cultural survival is an act of resistance and pride. It proves that while the British colonization changed the land forever, it did not extinguish the spirit of its first peoples. Their stories remain in the rocks, the rivers, and the stars, and in the voices of those who carry them forward. Ancient Australia is not a relic, it's a living force. In recent decades, there has been a growing movement to reclaim the true history of Australia, one that begins not in 1788, but in deep time. Schools are slowly integrating Indigenous perspectives. Museums now consult with communities before displaying cultural artifacts. Land acknowledgements are becoming more common, but there is still much work to do. True reconciliation requires more than acknowledgement. It demands truth-telling, justice, and the elevation of Indigenous voices in all spaces. The more we learn about ancient Australia, the more we realize it was never prehistory. It was rich, vibrant, and worthy of celebration. Understanding this ancient world changes how we see the modern one, revealing that knowledge, sustainability, and wisdom don't only come from books or institutions, but from land, story, and spirit. Reclaiming this history isn't just about the past. It's about creating a future where the oldest voices on Earth are heard, respected, and empowered. The forgotten ancient world of Australia is being remembered, and with it, the country itself is becoming more whole. As we close this journey into Australia's ancient world, we are reminded of a profound truth. The oldest living story on Earth doesn't belong in the margins of history. It is history. Long before ships reached its shores, Australia was home to cultures that built memory into mountains, maps into songs, and law into land. This was not a blank canvas waiting for civilization. It was civilization in a form that challenges how we define intelligence, progress, and human potential. The story of ancient Australia isn't just Aboriginal, it's human. It teaches us that sustainability, community, and spiritual connection are not modern innovations. They are ancient practices. Today, as we face global challenges, perhaps we need these lessons more than ever. The old world of Australia isn't gone. It walks with us in language and land and the resilience of its people. And now, perhaps we're ready to listen, not as visitors to the past, but as students of its wisdom.